Elizabeth McDonald, good evening. I am Charles Payne. President Trump showing his, well, some people say his affinity, if you will, for strongmen yet again today. The president, though, speaking on the phone with Russia's President Vladimir Putin over tensions in Syria and a myriad of other topics. This, of course, after the brouhaha of the White House inviting the Philippines president over. And again, yesterday with the idea of meeting Kim Jong-un under the right circumstances and using the word honorable. So the big thing now, the mass media is saying that President Trump has this affinity for the strongmen of the world. But does he just have a different, perhaps better approach? Joining me now, Tammy Bruce, Nan Hayworth, and Michael Barnes. Ladies, let me start with you. Listen, the guy, Kim Jong-un, no one thinks he's honorable, but there's sort of a method to the madness there. The Philippines, I think, still an ally of America, and Vladimir Putin, I think you would want the U.S. and America to have a reset with them, particularly after the last month, which has been pretty rocky, Tammy.
Yeah, this is a classic carrot and a stick. I mean, we're sending the military over to the island. We're going to blast them all to heck. And then the next thing you know, well, if the circumstances were right, sure, I'd meet with them. So you're appealing to the, look, tyrants have egos. Bad guys have egos, and he's appealing to that. It also, I think, speaks to the president's approach where he said that, you know, he doesn't want people to know what his plan is. He doesn't want to telegraph what his plan is. So when you keep everything on the table, nobody really knows. You don't need to be silent and secretive. Just have everything be on the table. Classic negotiating strategy, and it also can reap dividends. We've already seen what's happened with China. For the first time in ages, real negotiation, real working together. Same thing with the Philippines. The situation with, at least we're not sending pallets of cash over to North Korea.
Right.
That's sort of helpful, right? So I think it's good news.
Although, listen, we do know, everyone understands the brutality of Kim Jong-un, and we're learning even more about these death camps and these work camps. And of course, the new president of the Philippines has hit the world stage as something of a tyrant. You know, he's killing people, death squads, and it's becoming something of a pariah with the rest of the world. So how close, even when you're trying to flatter these guys with a charmed offensive, do you go with something like this?
Well, I agree with you, Charles. This is a charm offensive, perhaps. Tammy's right. The president is reserving all his options. He is using the carrot of meeting with the most potent leader in the entire world, namely himself, but developing a stick. And he is not going to, so long as he doesn't endorse these men who are brutal, all of whom were elected, by the way, before he was. So they were existing in this chaotic world that our antecedent to President Trump, President Obama, helped to create. Those pallets of money did go to North Korea in part. So the president's being savvy. He's being a negotiator. He's a businessman before he's an ideologue.
Right. Michael, you were a former, you were an advisor to George W. Bush, who I suspect, just thinking back in history, would have certainly have handled these situations differently. And what people are saying is that it is time for a different approach, that for the most part, all presidents more recently have checked off the same sort of diplomatic foreign policy box, and it's yielded a more dangerous world. It's given us a place that's on tinderbox right now.
Well, what Trump is doing is actually really smart in terms of making these comments to draw attention to the fact that he's trying to do things differently. This is a problem that has now troubled 4 presidents, and also that he's fulfilling his campaign promises. Every time he talks about Duterte, for example, the context of that is that he's dealing with North Korea in an aggressive way. When he's dealing with Vladimir Putin, it's to deal with ISIS and Syria and the complexities of that and North Korea. And so, and also with these types of statements, he's surprising and shocking people and taking attention away from the fact that here in Congress and in the courts, it's a little bit more difficult for him. He's got more oversight and more scrutiny, and he can't make the types of progress or, more importantly to him, draw the sorts of headlines and control the media coverage like he can when he deals with his roles as commander-in-chief and head of state. So
Tammy, I think another thing going on here, particularly the Philippines, who recently have sort of been wooing or put themselves out there to Russia. Hey, maybe we can have a relationship with you. Maybe we can have a relationship with China. There's still the idea that we want to sway nations around the world, and China is trying to portray itself now as something of a world leader. Russia, of course, has this still have grand ambitions, particularly Vladimir Putin. So there is a certain way you have to play this game, isn't there?
Well, there is. And to Nan's point about the last 8 years of Barack Obama, we abandoned the world. So it's just like with our military. It's not just using what we already have here. You must reinvent it. You've got to reinvent it as the individual with Trump, with every outreach, is defining the narrative. He's defining the agenda, and he's moving forward. He could virtually say anything, and the left, as you've noted in your opening, they lose their minds. But the fact of the matter is he's the president because everything that's happened before has not worked. And so we know where he's moving, but the fact of the matter is that he must reach out to these individuals. The last time we spoke directly to a president did to the leader of North Korea was kind of around the time of the Korean War. I mean, this abandonment, but it also, what matters also, and I'll close with this, is not just the engagement, like Obama engaged Cuba and Iran with effectively horrible results, with no real benefit to us, but it depends on what he's trying to accomplish, and clearly he's trying to accomplish a safer world.
You know, Michael, I think when President Obama engaged the world, beginning with that apology tour, if you will, and then later whether it was the Iran nuke deal or bringing Cuba back into our sphere, it was always that America was the bad guy. It always felt like we were making up for, you know, the social justice sort of thing that wasn't just applicable to the way progressives felt about America, but the way they felt about America and how mean-spirited we have been to the rest of the world.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is that even with that approach, when he did engage Cuba to sort of soften the relations, there were the exact same arguments that are now being levied against President Trump for his approach to North Korea. And so, you know, we have to bear in mind that he's dealing with an issue, as we've already heard, that has been existent now for at least 4 presidencies, and he's doing what he promised to do on the campaign trail. And these statements are drawing attention to the fact that he's attempting to make big, bold moves to shake up the way things are typically done in advancing his priorities. There's nothing wrong with that, and I think he deserves a shot to do things differently and get them right, perhaps.
I would argue, though, that if North Korea wasn't doing what it was doing, Donald Trump would not be offering to meet with the strongman of the Philippines.
Absolutely.
It's a different dynamic. Obama, there is no reason to go to Cuba except to save them from collapse because of the problems with Russia and Venezuela. Right. It's a very different agenda and why he's reaching out to these people.
Trump's playing a chess game. And as long as we're talking, we're not shooting, but they know that he is willing to use that
And
force.
to that point, in the call with Vladimir Putin, apparently they discussed Syria, a possible ceasefire. They discussed the Middle East at large. They even discussed North Korea. It was interesting. In the White House communique, there was no talk of a face-to-face meeting, but in the Russian communique about the meeting, they talked about a face-to-face meeting. And that might, Nan, point to the fact that it is something of an honor for these world leaders, even the ones who have said that they will destroy America, to meet face-to-face with the greatest, most powerful person in the world right now.
Well, Charles, you're right, and especially in terms of when we look at Syria, again, because of the lack of leadership by the previous administration, Russia has a role in Syria that's far larger than it should ever have had. So in order to achieve goals in, again, the least disruptive way, you know, the least likely to lead to a violent encounter, he's got it.
Also, does this mitigate potential criticism if America has to resort to a more violent solution with respect to North Korea, maybe greater intervention in the Middle East, even Syria, the Syrian government? Of course, remembering that President Trump, after seeing that horrific chemical attack, shifted his what he thought would be his policy to Syria. You could tell this is the carrot to your point, but this makes it a lot easier to the use of
Well, it does. It does. And even after that strike, most Americans previously did not want us to attack or to do anything. The support for that strike is like past 60%. It was a great thing to do, but he was able to do it because the American people were getting to know him. And in all of these outreaches, he's displaying the fact that he is willing to talk. He's not, you know, a hard case and deciding what to do. They're also, the American people as a result are also being informed about the nature of how many steps we've been taking. It fits the bill across the board about what needs to be accomplished by a commander-in-chief and a leader to get the American people behind you. It's being perfectly done.
You know, Michael, it's not far-fetched to say that if we do indeed get some form of a ceasefire in Syria, we get quicker resolution with ISIS and other parts in the Middle East, and North Korea is diffused. If it were a liberal, if it was Barack Obama, he would be up for a Nobel Prize. And I mean,
another one.
And I'm not being tongue in cheek. I mean, I wish I was being, but I mean, really, that would be the talk on the left, wouldn't it?
Good point. Yeah, this is the coalition building. This is the negotiation. This is the diplomacy, trying to do everything that is possible to avoid having to put American armed forces in harm's way. Absolutely. And all of this is, again, going toward the priorities that he has set for the nation. But that's not to say that we don't also have priorities that the president is not himself working on personally. Advancing human rights across the globe remains an American value that we're supporting. Other people are working on that. National Security Council, State Department, and all of its employees are advancing those missions separately. It's not as though they're abandoned whatsoever. The president is focused on the top priorities of American safety in North Korea and taking on and defeating ISIS.
As a last point on that, this is what gets you an aid worker released from Egypt with no quid pro quo.
Quickly, too. But
yeah,
it took
a few
10
weeks.
minutes on a phone call
Yes.
with the world leader who admires President Trump.
That's right.
In fact, from what I understand, the Egyptian press talks often about how Egypt is a favorite nation of America, and they wear that proudly. They wear that as a badge of honor to be a favorite nation of America under President Trump, and we didn't have to send, to your point, a whole lot of cash over to
That's
get that
right.
done.
And our friends in Israel appreciate a peaceful relationship, too, with them.
Absolutely, ladies. Thank you very much, Mike. Thank a lot. In the meantime, the Trump administration defending the government's spending budget, saying it was a, quote, bipartisan success. I say we should have shut the government down, but our panel, well, we're all going to join in. I want to hear from you on this one. Tweet me at CB Payne. Did the GOP blink? We'll be right back.